certainly got, because we've tried several times over the years to get you to get here, haven't we? And all sorts of things have happened. Is your back much better now?
My back is much better, thank
That's
you.
good. That's really good.
I'm so sorry to let everyone down last time, but
no, these things happen.
It was unavoidable, I'm afraid.
So, we have employed. We have spoken to lots and lots of people over the years who've worked for ABC. People like Len White and Mark Shuttleworth. And I spoke to Reg Collin only about 2 days ago. And of course, every single time they say to me, "You must get Verity to come and talk to you. You must get Verity to come and talk to you." I remember working with Verity on this and working with Verity on that. And Reggie actually said to me, "Mention the name Jack Dixon to Verity and see if she remembers Jack Dixon."
I do. I remember Jack Dixon. Jack Dixon was a Dutch director who came to direct an armchair theatre. And he came from Holland, and I was his PA. And it transpired that really he wasn't particularly interested in putting the cameras on, which we had to do in those days. You had to do a camera script, and you had to work out where your cameras were going to be. So it fell to me to actually shoot it for him. And he got another job out of it, I have to say.
But I suppose in some sense that's quite typical of what a lot of people have said about the early days of television, where lots of people sort of did each other's jobs and filled in gaps and deputised.
It's true. It was quite unusual, though, to have to do the director's job for him.
So how did you come to become a PA then? How did you get into TV in the first place?
Well, I got into TV by accident, really. I took a secretarial course, and eventually I got a job with Granada. I didn't really know anything about television, so it wasn't that I was saying, "Oh, I must work in television." But I became interested. Well, it seemed to me like it was a more interesting job than working in a lawyer's office typing contracts and things, which is what I had been doing some of the time. I thought, well, this is something I might enjoy, and I was right. I did.
So whose PA were you? It sounds like you went to several different people over the years you were there.
Well, I wasn't a PA when I first started. I was a shorthand typist.
Right.
And then I eventually, after a couple of years, was elevated to be the secretary to the head of the drama department at ABC Television, a man called Dennis Vance. I worked there as a secretary, and then I eventually got a job as a PA on, I think, one of the most horrible programs that I could possibly imagine, called State Your Case. Probably nobody remembers it, and it was absolutely awful. It consisted of two lawyers, a prosecuting lawyer and a defence lawyer, and what happened was poor unfortunate members of the audience who'd written in with really horrible tales to tell about what bad luck had befallen them were chosen to come up, and they were then in the witness box, and they were asked nice questions by the defence lawyer and very unpleasant questions by the prosecuting lawyer, and whoever won, we had a jury who then voted on who was the most worthy of these poor unfortunates, and they got £100. I mean, it was absolutely frightful.
I'm sure ITV will remake it next year, because it sounds like ideal for ITV.
It probably does. It does, doesn't it? With what's going on nowadays, and we wouldn't be surprised if they didn't resuscitate it.
Did you work on Tempo with Reggie Collin as well? Was that
I worked on Tempo. Yes, I did work on Tempo. Yes, I did. Of course I did. I also worked on an armchair theatre that Reg directed as well.
That's interesting. I didn't know Reggie directed any armchair theatres.
Yes, he did.
At what point did you sort of move over then from doing the factual programmes into doing dramas?
Well, that wasn't really factual. It was just awful. As soon as I could, really.
Yes.
I suppose I had to work about 6 or 8 months.
Right.
And then I was elevated to being a PA on a drama, which I really did enjoy.
And how many armchair theatres did you work on then, do you think? Just roughly, I mean, a lot? A few? Or?
Quite a few, actually. I suppose, I don't know, maybe 12, 14. I went off to America in the middle and did something else. Came back, yes.
I only asked because I wondered if you'd worked on, because I mean, obviously it's difficult to pick, because your name is not on the end credits, it's difficult to pick out which ones you did exactly. Did you work on the one? In fact, Mark might actually just run some slides from Armchair Theatre while we talk for a moment of the kind of period you worked in. Did you work on the one where, allegedly, that an actor died during production? That must have been horrible.
It was horrible. It was horrible because he was a very nice man, and it was also we were live in those days. So he died just before the end of the second act. We used to have 3 acts in Armchair Theatre, and the third act was the act in which he had the most to do. He had a kind of really, really major part, and of course, I mean, it was one of those things that nobody really knew what to do. I mean, nobody knew. It wasn't something that anybody had prepared for. And I don't know, rightly or wrongly, we just sort of ploughed on with this thing. And one of the actors, it was a period where this guy was asking lots of awkward questions of another actor. And the actor in question then kind of asked himself the questions and answered the questions. So I don't think... Well, the audience probably didn't miss this actor at all, and the next day, the critics in the front page of the paper was a thing saying, "Actor dies in the middle of play," and on the back page where the television critic were saying what an awful play it was. It's really.
I don't know. Somebody once told me that
It was called Underground.
Yes, that was Underground. That was it. That the director rushed off to actually direct it, literally on the studio floor, and left you in the gallery to try and.
Well, I mean, he didn't.
sort
I mean, to be fair to him, he didn't rush off. I mean, he rushed off onto the studio floor to try to work out what was going to happen, leaving me to try to find out from the Master Control, who were the people who put the adverts out, whether we should continue or not. And since they were unable to give me any kind of definitive answer, we continued.
Well, I mean, it's something you would never want to happen, but I think in terms of a baptism of fire, you must have learned a lot very quickly, and the whole production team must have learned a lot very quickly for the future. That's the problem with live television sometimes; it's very unpredictable, isn't it?
But it's always. I mean, I worked for this very volatile director called William Kotcheff, who later went off to Hollywood to make movies, and he was a terrific director, and I learned a huge amount from him. It wasn't the first Armchair Theatre I worked on. And I suppose it wasn't an experience which hopefully was ever going to be repeated. But yes, you did have to think on your feet when you had to think on your feet anyway when you were doing live television, because things always went wrong.
Very true. So obviously you went to ABC and you met Sidney Newman. Okay.
Well, that's where I met Sidney Newman. Sidney Newman eventually arrived at ABC, and he was the producer. He was actually the producer on that particular programme. Yeah. And Jack Dixon, this man that I worked for, got this job because I had worked for this very good director called Ted Kotcher, so I could put cameras on quite well. I mean, I knew what would look good and everything. So he got quite a classy thing from me, I have to say. And he got another job, and he didn't have me. He had someone else who didn't do quite as well. The Sidney Newman saying to me, "I don't understand it, Verity. The first show looked so great, and this one," and I said, "That's because I did the cameras." Anyway, I was always telling Sidney that I really wanted to direct, actually. I mean, that was what I wanted to do. So I was like the original Yosser in Boys from the Black Sox, saying, "I could do that, I could do that."
And yet somehow you ended up producing, didn't you, as opposed to directing? Or in those days, was there no distinction between producing and directing? Was it all much the same thing back then, or was it? No, there was a big distinction between producing and directing, except in comedy, where quite often the producer was the director. But in drama, no, the director was the director and the producer was the producer. And I mean, really, I suppose the distinction is that in most circumstances, or certainly if you're starting off a series, the producer is the person who, if you like, is in overall control in every way in terms of the budget, which directors you use, with the director, which cast, which actors you use. And what happened was, when I did start producing, I still wanted to direct, but then I suddenly realised that as a producer, I had much more control, really, on an overall basis, and that was part of it. But also, I felt that I could be an adequate director without being a very good director, and that it would be better to get people who had much more talent in that area to direct, and then that my forte was probably producing. So I mean, how soon did you know Sidney was going to leave and go to the BBC, and you chose to go with him? Because
I didn't go with him.
It was quite a leap in the dark, really, I suppose, to swap channels.
Well, he went. And I know I didn't go with him, and indeed, when he went, I had absolutely no idea that he was going to offer me a job. What happened is I had come back from America with a promise of an interview to direct, which never came about at ABC. And I was pretty fed up with being a PA, and I decided that I gave myself a year, and I thought, well, I'll if I don't move into some other area in a year, I'll just get out and do something completely different. So I was really sort of looking around to see what I might do. And I got a call from Sydney at the BBC saying that they were going to produce a new children's serial. And he asked me what I knew about children, which was nothing, because of course I didn't have any. So I said nothing, really. And he said, well, would I come and meet with Donald Wilson, who was in charge of the serial department at the BBC, and that there was this new children's show, and he had certainly suggested me as a possible producer, along with other...
Yes.
He did say to me, along with other people. And so I went along, but I think that wasn't true, really. He just didn't want me to get overconfident, really. So I went along and was interviewed, and I was offered the job, which was thrilling for me, because I really needed to move, and that this seemed like a good move, and I thought, well, if maybe I'll be able to direct after a time if I take this job. But anyway, it was Doctor Who, and of course it was a fantastically wonderful thing to be offered.
What I find interesting about it, when you look at the history of television as a whole, as we do as a research group, is that you get stock BBC producers who turn up lots of times doing lots of shows, and stock ITV producers, but it really is quite unusual to have someone switch channels like that, and then a brand new credit for Verity Lambert appearing on something that actually was quite daring and quite innovative for its time. Did you feel like? Did you feel like yes, he had specifically chosen you for that role? Because of course afterwards you went on to be more of a sort of jobbing producer of the BBC, didn't you? And you did lots of other shows afterwards.
Well,
in that way.
I suppose. I was never a staff at the BBC.
Yeah.
I was always a freelance. Yes, I did. Obviously, Sydney had chosen me to do that job, and I was extremely grateful for him. But I actually, I suppose I'd be very, very fortunate in that except for Jonathan Krieg, I have never actually not actually started a series myself.
Yes.
So I suppose I just take slightly exception to the word jobbing producer, which I actually think is... I don't mean it. I think it's kind of quite a pejorative term in the sense that, I don't think any producer's a jobbing producer, really. It's an incredibly hard job, and you either had, it's a job, but whether it's jobbing or I don't know.
I meant it just in the sense that you moved around lots of productions.
I moved around because I wanted
you did the newcomers. Yes. You're
And
right. You always start them off. That's quite true. You're always the first producer on them.
So I think that, and I think people who do come in and actually, for example, the people who came after me and had to do Doctor Who, I think their job was extremely difficult because I had all the luck of not being prejudged. I didn't have anything to that nobody was going to say, well, this is a huge success. Now what are you going to do about it? So I left a legacy. We were very fortunate, and I have to say, quite really fortunate, because I was a very inexperienced producer, and I think there was a lot of luck attached to the success of Doctor Who, which we know in hindsight, because although I had experience working in television, I wasn't experienced, and I suppose I was lucky in the sense that you have all the arrogance of the young and not realizing what pitfalls are actually in your way. But I think that, for example, Innes Lloyd, who came in and produced Doctor Who after I did, who did, I think, a fantastically good job and made it, resuscitated, revitalized it, really. Had probably a more difficult job, and just as I'm full of admiration for Russell T Davies and the people who have resuscitated Doctor Who, because I think that what they've done is it's terribly difficult to resuscitate something that's become a sort of legend, and what they have done is they have kept essence of the old series, and but brought it up to date so that a modern audience can, react and enjoy
it's
it.
interesting you talk about it in that way in terms of the ebbs and flows of a programme, because when we looked at, obviously, questions for today, etc., we talked to a few people who know far more about Doctor Who than I do, and they said, well, really, the start of Doctor Who is very well documented now. Verity spoke an awful lot about it on things like audio commentaries on the DVDs, but there was that little period afterward when David Whittaker left and Dennis Spooner came in as a story editor, where the series sort of changed its feel a little and became, not comedic's the wrong word, but it had a slightly more, the Doctor's character softened a little, there was a slightly bit more humour. I just wondered if that was something that you were intentionally did, and because Dennis Spooner being more of a writer of perhaps that style, his style came through, didn't it?
Well, I mean, Dennis was a script editor when I was a producer, and yes, we did actually do one serial which about Nero, which was really an out-and-out comedy, and it was incredibly unsuccessful with the audience. I hated it, and so we never, I mean, in my time, and with maybe there was some unintentional comedy in it, but in my time after that, we didn't set out to do the comedy because it just didn't work. And I think one of the problems, oh dear, this has happened. Can everybody hear me?
We're fine. We're fine.
Yeah. One of the problems with Doctor Who has always been that if you start to parody what's there, it doesn't work. And I think that, sort of in the last part of Doctor Who, before it was stopped, it had become a bit of a parody of itself, and people, I think, felt less enthusiastic about it.
Well, it's interesting you pointed out what we will do. But Mark was going to show you a clip from the Romans, but we're not. I think we'll just scrub the Romans, since Verity said she didn't like it much. But
I don't mind. If
there wasn't an episode of Doctor Who, of course, that being a Christmas event, we really should talk about, because you did do one entire episode shot on Christmas Day, didn't you? The Feast of Stephen.
Did I produce that?
I think that was one of yours. In your third series, that was the big long Dalek Master Plan serial. They ran for about 12 weeks. That Dennis Spooner wrote with Terry Nation.
That.
Oh, that was that.
No.
I thought was that. Oh, my fault that I'm talking rubbish. I'm going to shut up. Then I'm clearly I'm just.
When you said that,
today.
I thought, God,
yeah,
I really kind of blanked something. It's quite possible that I have blanked something.
That is
out,
fine. But it's interesting you saying that. Then perhaps that was an example where the comedy had gone too far, as you say, because perhaps doing episodes on Christmas Day, where they sort of toasted the camera and wished Merry Christmas, perhaps.
Oh, I'd never allowed that.
Yeah, I think so. That's brilliant, as it were. So was it your decision to move on from Doctor Who then, to do something different, or did they actually say to you, do you want to carry on doing it?
No, I actually wanted to go. Not because I was terribly grateful, but I felt that I'd had, that it needed new blood. I think everything needs a new mind on it, and I wanted to do something different. So I did ask. I did actually ask if I could produce Adamant. I asked Sydney if I could do that, because I just felt. I mean, I could have stayed, I'm sure, with Doctor Who forever, because you can do if that happens, and some producers could do that and do very well at it. I just felt no,
that's okay. That's
had
okay.
enough.
Well, do we have a clip of Adamant to talk, Mark? Could you possibly? Okay, that's brilliant, as it were. While Mark's just clearing up a little clip, then this is a series that really this year has had a massive revival, hasn't it?
Yes.
Adamant. Do you find that amazing that your old shows sort of come back to you 20 years later with this big fan following?
Well, I find it very. I mean, I'm obviously very flattered that people feel, that they are worth reviving. Obviously. I think the thing with Adamant was the most brilliant idea, and funny enough, on the way up here, I was watching a couple of the DVDs because I hadn't had a chance to watch any, and I was reading the notes and things with it, which were very well done. I thought, and very interesting, and there was one part where it said that I did feel about Adamant that I never quite got it right, and I don't think any of us has. I know Sydney didn't feel that way. I just felt it should have been wittier, and perhaps less like the Avengers. I never really wanted it to be like the Avengers, and somehow it always ended up being like the Avengers.
Do you have that clip, Mark? You might not be able to see it, though, because we're a bit far back here, but the audience
can
see
hear it.
Can see it. Well,
no, that.
a knight in white armor, cold as a shot from a gun. If you should look for a man who loves danger, to whom love is a stranger, this man is the one.
Also, okay, that's fine.
Oh, it's just the title.
That's the title sequence, yeah. I mean, which in a sense, I mean, I can understand why people compared it to the Avengers. Though I agree with you, I never really saw it in the same mould as the Avengers. But that was probably because it shared some of the same writers, didn't it? So it was going to have inevitable comparisons, perhaps because of that.
It shared a lot of the same writers, and you know, some very good writers. But I think the problem is if you work for something like the Avengers, and you're working for something that has a premise which is a bit outrageous, then there is a tendency to try and repeat things that you know work in another area. Whereas I think what we really needed was more Mark Twain than the Avengers, more Yankee at the court of King Arthur. I don't know if people know that whole kind of observation of two cultures completely separated by years, you know, and I just felt apart from the one that seemingly has been wiped, that James McTaggart wrote, I don't think we ever really got as close as I would have liked. I mean, that's not to say that. I mean, I thought that Gerald Harper was superbly good as Adamant. I mean, really, just the right person. And Juliet was sweet as what's her name?
Georgina.
Georgina, that's right.
I can't forget that name. I'm not allowed to. My wife's Georgina.
Well, absolutely. And Jack May was absolutely lovely as the butler with all these awful limericks, but it just sort of missed really. I just felt
it's difficult. I mean, I suppose it
has to be honest about the things you sort of feel that really work
well.
I
think that's very, very true.
I mean, it's much my fault as anyone else's, you know, that I couldn't
very true.
somehow get.
And then you went from such a I suppose a contrast, having done really what up to then had been, you know, sort of action, stroke dramatic type shows. You went into a soap opera, didn't you? The newcomers that you set up.
Well, I did set up the newcomers before, between Doctor Who and
I'm sorry,
actually.
I've got my orders.
No, that's all right. I can't remember a lot of things I can remember.
I think your memory's very good. Verity actually said, I won't remember much. I think she remembers an awful lot, actually. I think she's got a very good memory.
I remember bits, but not necessarily detail. But then the newcomers, well, actually, Sydney said to me, I had to start the newcomers. I mean, actually, what happened was that there was another soap opera that Sydney wanted me to do, which was called 199 Park Lane.
Oh, yes.
And I read the scripts, and I just hated the scripts. And then I said I would only do it if we could rewrite the scripts, and we rewrote the scripts, and then the guy who'd written the scripts objected strongly. And I just told Donald Wilson, who is still my head of department, that I would only produce the show if I could take my name off it. So he thought he didn't think that was funny at all.
No.
So then I was given the newcomers, which had wonderful scripts. I mean, I actually really liked the newcomers. The newcomers about it was about new towns. It was about people from urban districts being moved into the country, and I suppose at that time Milton Keynes was being built, so it was very much to do with how country people would take in these urban people and how these urban people would in fact manage to, you know, change their lifestyle. And it was really about something that was going on at that point, and was written by a very, very good writer called Colin
Morris.
Thank you very much, Colin Morris, who had written some of the best drama documentaries for the BBC. So it was terrifically good scripts, and I enjoyed doing that. I mean, it was completely different to Doctor Who and Adamant because it was very much about reality and life, and that was good fun too.
And that is one of your features of your career, there's no doubt about it, that you've produced such a diverse range of programmes. And you've produced historical serials, like sort of W. Somerset Maugham you went on to later, and science fiction, you've done the sort of slightly supernatural stuff like Jonathan Creek, you've done soap operas like The Eldorado and The Newcomers, and that must be a great advantage to you, but also as a challenge to you, in the sense that you're thinking about so many different genres.
I suppose I quite like things to be not the same as they were before, so I quite like new things, and I'm attracted to interesting ideas, even if they don't always work. I mean, you mentioned Eldorado. I still maintain that Eldorado came from an idea which was really which we never made work, and I'm not going to defend what it turned out to be initially, but the basis of it was that most soap operas are about people who stay with their roots. They're EastEnders. They're people who live in that area, work in that area, and they don't move away, which is what actually happens to most people in life. They don't. But when Eldorado was conceived, it was about the time when work in Europe was opening up, and that it was possible for people to move out into other European countries who are part of the EU and work there. And I thought it would be interesting and informative to do a soap opera about people who had deliberately moved away from their roots and who had to put down roots in a new place, and how they would do it and what might happen to them. I mean, that was the original concept. I'm not saying that's the concept as it appeared on television, because something happened along the road which wasn't, in my opinion, taking it in the right direction. And it took us a very long time to start getting back round, which I think we were doing towards the end of Eldorado, to get back to that original concept and try to work through it. And it was sad, but I mean, these things happen, and one has to be philosophical about it.
Now, without wishing to sort of gloss over parts of your career, because I'm sure the audience might feel something later, you finished at the BBC and you went to LWT and did a whole range of plays at LWT. Well, why did you decide to do the switch back to ITV again? Was there a particular reason, or?
I went to LWT because I just won a BAFTA award, or I think it's called a SEFTA award in those days, for the Somerset Maugham series. And in typical BBC, the way the BBC works, if you win an award, you just don't work. So I won this award, and my head of department then told me that he didn't think there was anything else for me to do at the BBC. So I was rather forced into leaving the BBC. It wasn't a matter of choice, I have to say. And then I went to London Weekend because Stella Richmond, who was the director of programmes, asked me to produce Budgie, which Willis Hall and Keith Waterhouse had written, and who were writers whose work I very much admired. So that was good fun. And then actually I went back to the BBC briefly to do Shoulder to Shoulder, which is a series about the suffragettes. But what happened was at Thames, ABC, which had now become Thames with rediffusion, I heard that Lloyd Shirley, who'd been their head of drama, was leaving the Thames to set up Euston Films. And I thought it might be interesting to run a drama department, rather than actually, as I had been doing, just be responsible for one strand, to have a sort of overview. So Jeremy Isaacs was then the director of programme, and I asked my then agent, who was quite mystified as why I should want this job, to ring Jeremy and say that he was looking for a thing.
Now, you asked us, when we asked you last March what you'd like to see again, you mentioned a couple of your LWT plays, which we have duly dug out the archives for you to actually take away and watch. But we're trying to try. Which one is this, Mark? This is it's a clip from Achilles' Heel we're going to show the audience now, that was directed by Alan Clark.
Yeah, directed by the great Alan Clark, and it was about a footballer, a very successful footballer who got an injury to his Achilles' heel and was not going to be able to play again.
Well, let's have a look then, Mark, at this little bit so the audience gets a feel for what it was like.
Shaw.
Yes, yeah. pull me up.
You've seen him. 10 short years ago, the man ran his legs off on a football pitch for selling a measly £20 a week. Today, it's more like to be £150 or £200 a week. Now the man on the terraces has a right to ask, is the performance he's getting from the pampered superstars of today worth 10 Stanley Matthews or 10 Tommy Lawtons? There's only one answer to that, not bloody likely.
Shows you how long ago that was, £150 a week. Hello.
And also, if Mark is very, very quick here, like obviously we'll talk about some of these generally. Also, you asked us about a play called After Loch Lomond. You wanted to see again as well.
Great favourite of
yeah,
mine.
well, why was that particular favourite then?
Well, it had two wonderful actors in it, Leonard Rossiter and Joan Sims, and it was just one of those plays. Well, I just enjoyed it. It was about this terrible bus tour with all these people on this bus, and Leonard Rossiter played this man who was a complete pain in the arse, basically. And Joan Sims I just love Joan Sims. I can watch her do anything. She was the most wonderful actress. And written by somebody who I work with a lot called Douglas Livingston, who as a writer I admire enormously. So I just rather enjoyed it.
Gotcha. Do we have a clip to a Mark? Yep. That's great. Let me have a quick look at this as well. It's a very famous sound.
Yes.
Why don't you take these home to watch?
That's very kind.
Terrible morning, isn't it? For June, anyway.
Pretty shocking, yes.
I was in Majorca last week. Bit different there, I can tell you.
Ah, that would be, wouldn't it?
We didn't have a cloud all week.
Nice.
You going away this year, are you?
Big, went to Scotland.
Oh, nice.
It wasn't too bad.
Very nice.
Little snatches.
I'm
of
sorry, it's
history.
rather.
No, little snatches of history. It's fascinating. Do you? I mean, obviously, you produce very long-running serials, but also, I said over the years, these sort of odd plays have sort of come through. Do they have different challenges doing a play compared to doing a series?
I suppose there are some differences in that obviously if you have doing a series, you're looking at a long run, and you're looking at having characters that will be that the audience will want to see week after week, that they will want to come back to and relate to. Whereas in a play, because it's a single one-off, you're usually going with the writer's voice.
Yes.
And it doesn't matter so much if the characters. I mean, actually, the Leonard Rossiter character was actually he wasn't unsympathetic. He was rather sad actually, because he's just one of those people that, just is so irritating. Nobody wanted to be near him on this bus, there are different. It is different. You have to look at it in a different way,
yes.
really.
You also asked us about a series called Between the Wars that you wanted
Yes.
to see some more of again.
Well, that was a series that there was. I had done a series of Somerset Maugham stories, which were all based on his short stories rather than his novels. And the short stories are very, very good for adapting into hour-long television plays. And between the wars, between the 1914-18 war and the 1939 war, was a real heyday of short story writing. So I persuaded London Weekend to let me do this series of 6. And I found, 6 short stories by writers, actually, who weren't particularly famous, that we dramatised. And it was very satisfying to do, actually.
Great. So,
It was like doing 6 single plays
Yes,
anyway, because
yes.
they were all they weren't related,
Yes.
except by their period.
But that was actually something that they did in those days, whereas nowadays it's very hard to find a broadcaster who will do 6 single plays. And if they do, they wanted them very quick and very cheap and rush them
Well,
through.
there's just so much more competition these days for ratings that it's very hard, I think.
Which play is this, Mark? We've got one of them, haven't we? They are. This is a clip from Mr. Loveday's Little Outing.
Right.
Okay, which
I
we should.
think is that Richard Bryars?
Poor devils.
Thank you.
They're constantly destroying things.
John the Measurer.
Oh, John the Mesmer.
I'm afraid that is so, my lord. You know, I might quite easily write a letter to the Times on the very subject.
Oh, yes, my lord.
It was wars, you know. Oh, my goodness me, yes. They blame them on their elders, wisers, betters. Kitchener, Gordon. I mean, even the Pope. See, principally, you see, is a question of rerouting the Suez Canal. But they're principally to blame, the poor. Give me severe headaches that day. Often. My ears hurt. I might quite easily write a letter to the Times.
I haven't typed out your letter to the Pope yet, my lord, but if there are any more letters, shall we do them after tea?
After tea. Yes, that's another thing.
It's very interesting. I mean, perhaps it's more by accident than design, but over the years you seem to have used actors who, I suppose now we think of them all as comedy actors, but they aren't. I mean, John the Measurer was a fantastic straight actor. Leonard Rossiter was a great straight actor. And even now you've got Tamsin Greig doing Love Suit, you've got Alan Davis doing Jonathan Creek. People, people view them sometimes as being comedy actors, and they're not, are they? They're just very, very good straight actors.
Well, yes, they're actors, really. And I mean, it's very interesting. There are because I've mainly worked with David Renwick in the last 2 years doing Jonathan Creek and now Love Soup, and he, of course, is a writer of comedy or comedies. And we obviously see a lot of actors for parts. It's very interesting because some very, very good actors can't do comedy. They're just not funny. I mean, being funny is just so indefinable. And somebody comes in and they can do a reading of something and you're just laughing.
Yes.
And somebody else who's probably a very good actor can come in and it's not funny at all.
That's quite true.
And it's one of those things. I think that people like John Le Mesurier, I mean, John Le Mesurier is a really interesting man. And he used to hear, he loved jazz, and he used to hear the words in his head like music. I mean, I remember talking to him about it. He used to say to me, it's like, you know, I have to hear the rhythm in my thing. And he would kind of cup his ear. But he had the most superb timing. But that doesn't, you know, just, there are sort of comics who are comics only, but there are lots and lots of actors who can do comedy and who also can do straight acting as well. And it's an amazing amount, you know. People. I mean, look at Johnny Vegas in Bleak House. I mean, he was fantastically good.
And in some sense, that's one thing that Jonathan Creek has done, as you say. I mean, you know, people like Adrian Edmonds. Is it Adrian Edmonds, I think, who's come into it, you know, who's actually been very good in those sort of straight roles.
Well, Ed Edmonds, he's in Casualty now.
Yes.
Or is it Casualty
Holby
or
City.
Holby City. One, you know, well, one of those hospital ones. I love him. He's lovely. He's a lovely man, and he's very, very clever and funny as well. Yeah.
It's very interesting. You touched upon going to Thames, which is where we're going next, really.
Yes, right.
Which was a massive period of creative work in your career. People look back at it and they think of the big famous sort of shows like The Minders and The Quatermass and Widows and shows like that. But there was lots of other stuff in between as well, wasn't it? You were, you know.
Well, it was hugely. I mean, it was actually hugely enjoyable. Just for I did it. Oh, I can't remember. I suppose I did it for about 6 or 7 years with Euston Films. It was just that whole thing of being able to look at our Thames's drama, which, although, you know, we couldn't put a real stamp on it as far as Thames is concerned because it was all mixed up with everybody else's in ITV's drama, but we did have a sort of, I do think we created some kind of personality for Thames, which was really based, when I went to Thames, Granada was a great drama company, you know, and I kind of started to try to think why Granada had such a strong identity as a drama company. And I thought one of the reasons is that in the main they do drama from their region. They did a lot of northern-based drama, and they did a lot of drama which said something about the region that they came from. And so I decided that we wouldn't do any drama in Thames that didn't come out of London and its environment for a while anyway. We never did anything that came from the north at all.
probably quite true.
But I mean, not for any other reason. That I
Yes.
just felt we had to somehow try and get an identity for the kind of drama that Thames was going to make. So we made things like Bill Brand, which was about a very left-wing Labour MP in Parliament, and we had a Labour government at the time, Harold Wilson's government. And then we did, and something that reflected life as it was lived. I wanted to reflect contemporary life as well. We did Follies, which was about these girls who got together and how they were successful, and then how they were success kind of fell apart, and how they were really used by their promoters and things. And we made a decision, we never did any filming for that. Everything was made inside a television studio, because we thought these girls, they don't go out. They go out, to go. But basically their life is lived in recording studios and in concerts and at home. They're not people who run down the road or whatever. So we never went outside. And I thought that was quite brave. Actually, we could never afford to go outside either. But it was an
convenient as well.
advantage. It was an advantage to us to do it that way. And I suppose we did it with Edward and Mrs. Simpson. I think we made Edward and Mrs. Simpson, but I felt that that was reasonable, because the abdication of Edward VIII had a huge effect on the royal family and Britain at the time. So I felt that we were living in a time which had, if we like, had the consequences of that action, or not necessarily the consequences. Yes, the consequences of that action, really. So. And then we had things like Minder as well.
It's very interesting, because when you talk about that, I mean, you talk about it like you were really the producer on the ground for so many. And did you find that you still had a huge amount of creative input as that sort of head of drama type role?
I had a creative input, but not as a producer, because I was also very fortunate having some wonderful producers working for me, people like Andrew Brown, who produced Rock Follies and Edward and Mrs. Simpson. I had Paul Knight, who produced something called The Crez, which I actually think we should resuscitate today, which was a sort of written by Clive Exon, set in this London communal garden behind, actually it was set behind Ladbroke Grove, and it was a sort of mixed area, so there were quite posh people living in these very big houses, and then there were houses that were bed sit, so that you've got an incredible mixture of people. And I think it was before its time, really. And then another series that Doug Livingston wrote called Born and Bred, which was about this huge South London family, and they only ever came together on special occasions like Christmas or one of the number getting the British Empire medal and things. And it was a family that some people had gone up and some people hadn't gone up and some people had gone down, and it was like every sort of huge family party where everything was usually disastrous for one reason or another, and one group of the family were fighting with it. And also because Doug Livingston is a very funny and surreal writer, it was funny.
I mean, this is more of a general question. Do you think it would get commissioned today? Because in some sense, a lot of what Thames did then, as you say, was quite groundbreaking. I mean, Rock Follies perhaps may not get commissioned today in that same way, or they try and make it on film with a budget of £50 million to try and, Well,
they did make a film of Rock Follies, actually. But, I don't know. I think something like Rock Follies was very much of its time. But possibly, I mean, why not? I mean, the music. I mean, you could have something about the music business, which has changed hugely with the internet and all that kind of thing, but it'd be a completely different kind of program. But I suppose that Rock Follies really was about success and failure, and women sort of finding themselves, and at the same time of finding themselves of being actually exploited by men.
Yes.
And then being unable really to. I mean, I suppose you might look at the Spice Girls and say, not that they're very unsuccessful. I mean, they've all got a lot of money, but I mean, they all split up in the end because they couldn't really stay together.
Now, I mean, it's interesting you're going on to mention. I find it interesting that Euston Films went into doing, I suppose TV films is the wrong word, but they seem to start to lean towards doing more cinematic type releases, I thought, toward the end of the 70s. Things like The Sailor's Return and also the Quatermass Seal that then became a sort of cinema film version of that as well. Was that
Yes.
a deliberate decision? Was that something you liked, the fact they felt they could go to a bigger market perhaps?
Well, I think that The Sailor's Return came out of the fact that we made, and that was actually made within Thames, The Naked Civil Servant, which was a film, but it was actually made by Thames Television and not used in films. And Jack Gold, who directed The Naked Civil Servant, wanted to make The Sailor's Return, and we consequently made a place for it at Euston Film.
Yes.
But we did do several. We did The Knowledge, the Jack Rosenthal
Yes.
film at Euston Films, which was lovely. And we also, I mean, the great thing was when I first started at Thames, I just ran the television side. By that I mean we worked in a more traditional way. We worked on tape. I mean, Rock Follies was made entirely on tape. And then when I went to Euston Films, I was able to work entirely on film. So it was unusual to make something entirely on film like The Naked Civil Servant at Thames. But then, of course, it all began to change enormously, and now nothing is made. Well, everything now is made on HD, or was going to be, which is tape. But I mean, there was a whole period where almost everything, all the drama was made on film, and very little was made in the studio. But I mean, we made series at Euston Films like Riley Ace of Spies, for example, which was very much a series, and Flame Trees of Thika, which was very much a series, and Minder, of course. Yeah. And we did do the odd film. We did Charlie Muffin, David Hemmings.
Yes.
We did The Knowledge. We did.
Yeah. I think we might have a clip of Minder, possibly, Mark. This is from, hopefully, a Christmas edition of Minder. It's interesting because the one thing that we have discovered is that over the years, obviously, you've done lots and lots of work, but not that much design for showing at Christmas, actually, interesting enough. That's a conscious thing.
Maybe we had Christmas off.
Yes, precisely. We actually preferred to not to do Christmas specials. Here, Mark.
Well, I don't think so. I think in those days, there wasn't. Christmas specials were mostly comedy.
Right.
Actually.
Right. Yeah.
Mostly sort of
Fair point.
Fools and Horses.
Yes.
You should have put the lights on first.
Yeah, I know. That was down to his nips. He promised, didn't he?
He's got a busy week, hasn't he? Taking her indoors and the kids down the airport and trying to knock out 4 cases of Dunhill aftershave down the market.
That shouldn't be too hard.
Yeah, but this is lighter fluid. Splash this all over, you end up with Human Torch.
They're going to be on his top for Christmas, is he?
Yeah, well,
He will be up to all sorts of things.
you're like running away from geezers with scorched chins.
Well, he'll be in a mood for a party. Where'd you club? Hello, Mrs. Daly. No, he's not here at the moment, but we are expecting him any minute now. Yes, of course, I'll tell him. Yes, right, yes. Merry Christmas. Yeah.
You're often quoted as saying that it's really thanks to the ITV strike and your faith in this show, really, that it survived. Minder was at first, the ratings were not particularly good on it. Is that something you've done before? You hold faith in the product?
Well, I always felt that Minder was going to be a success. I mean, it never occurred to me that it wouldn't be. I mean, I just simply had all the ingredients ready. And the first series did suffer, I think, quite badly because of the strike, really.
Yeah.
I mean, there was 3 months of blank screens, of TV blank screens. And we were bringing back Dennis Waterman in a really completely different role to the very successful one he played in The Sweeney. We were bringing a new show in, and The Sweeney had gone, which everybody... And I mean, it was a fantastic show, The Sweeney. I had nothing to do with it, so I can be very, I'd say that without any axe to grind. We had no publicity for it. I mean, because nobody knew when the strike was going to end. They couldn't publicise something because we didn't know whether it was going to go on in 1 week or 6 weeks. So we came on the air without being able to really have any interviews and all the things that you get in the press that people read and they kind of think, oh well, and they start to. So Dennis came in and he was playing this rather. Kind of very much more gentle role than the one he had played in The Sweeney. and I think people. I think also we, series have to work themselves in. So I think there was. We started off, I think, with a rather, probably with hindsight, probably a rather one of the more violent episodes of the Sweeney, which was the one. What was called something at the OK Corral.
Gunfight at the OK Laundrette.
Gunfight at the OK Corral, which was about this was it a
Laundrette, that's
yes,
right,
being
siege in a
taken over.
laundrette.
They made a mistake and they held up the wrong place, and it was this laundrette, which is quite funny. But it was quite violent, actually. And, of course, everybody started saying, oh, this is terribly violent and this shouldn't be that violent. But actually, it wasn't nearly as violent as the Sweeney bit. It was just people's perception. And it took... I think we did 9 episodes in the first series for some reason, maybe because of the strike. And it really took everybody to almost the last episodes before they kind of got into it. And I would have been absolutely devastated if they cancelled it, because I just knew that it was going to work. It's just, I don't often know things are going to work, but I just knew that was going to work. And fortunately, Brian Cowgill, who then was the director of programmes at Thames, I went to Brian and said, look, I know the ratings aren't that good, but, you really can't, please do not cancel the show. Please let's make another series, because I'll put money on the fact that it'll work in the second series. And he was, he believed. I mean, in those days, of course, there was much less pressure, and there weren't 75 committees in order, that you had to sit through in order to get anything made, which is what happens today. And he said, okay, I will back you. Your instincts have been good, and therefore I'll back you.
Gotcha.
So we did a second series, and of course, I was right. I mean, I wasn't really taking a big chance there. I just knew it was going to work. And it did.
I think I'm right in saying you went into cinema films after that, didn't you? You went to work for Thorn EMI?
I went to work for Thorn EMI, yes, for 3 years.
Which is quite a change. That's why I wondered.
It was a change. It wasn't. I didn't enjoy it, I have to say. It wasn't
the best one you did was Clockwise, I thought, actually. I thought Clockwise with John Cleese was actually very funny.
We made some good films, and there was also, we made Dream Child with Coral Brown about Alice in Wonderland as a grown-up, and I thought that was a wonderful film. But anyway, it was extremely difficult. It was interesting. I learnt a lot, but it wasn't the most pleasant 3 years of my life.
And then you formed, I think, Cinema Verity.
I formed Cinema Verity, and we made another film, another feature film with Meryl Streep called A Cry in the Dark, which is about the woman whose baby was taken by a dingo in Australia. I mean, I suppose was that born out of the fact that at the time there was a big movement to commission independent producers by then and do less in-house? It was born out of the fact that no, because it wasn't for television. It was
I meant sort of.
No, it was born out of the fact that I got Meryl Streep, basically, and that's what got the film made. That's entirely to do with it.
Got you. The period of cinema, you touched on El Dorado earlier, the period of Cinema Verity work that you then sort of went into had some great successes, I think. Things like May to December, I think, was a great success.
We made a lot of May to December.
That you did.
We made a serial called Sleepers, which was about 2 Russian agents who had been shipped off to Britain some years before and who'd been lost and were then woken up, but not really woken up. They thought they'd been woken up, and they went on the run because they didn't want to go back to Russia. And it was quite good fun, I thought, actually.
Very, very successful. My colleague Mark at the back there loves it, actually. He was saying he'd ask you a question on it later if you hadn't mentioned it already, because one of his personal favourites.
Well, it was very enjoyable, with Nigel Havers and Warren Clark playing the Russian agents. And it all hinged on the fact that they were recognised in the crowd of the World Cup in 1966.
But I suppose it was also a period, as you said, about El Dorado, where people criticised you for El Dorado and the way it went down, and there was also something else. Was it Sam Saturday? The critics didn't like Sam Saturday either, did they? Did you feel that it was a period of mixed fortunes, with some stuff very successful, some stuff perhaps not going down how you thought it would?
Yes, they didn't dislike Sam Saturday that much. It's simply that it didn't really work as well as all that. I mean, I quite liked Sam Saturday.
I thought they scheduled it very badly, didn't they? They put it on a sort of Saturday night about 9:45 at night in the summer, which is not one of the best slots you could give to something, and didn't really push it either. It wasn't really promoted as a series, was it? So
No.
didn't get the attention perhaps it should have done from ITV?
I think I can't really remember. I mean, you win some, you lose some with those things. I mean, Eldorado I would take some responsibility for, because I just simply should have dug my heels in and said to the BBC, we cannot make this in the time you want us to make it. I mean, it was a shame, because we went on the air probably 3 months before we should have gone on the air, and we could have ironed out a lot of the problems which were apparent to us,
Yeah.
but which we didn't have time to iron out.
Sure.
So, and that's one of the problems about being an independent, because you don't have, if it was within the BBC, you could just sit down and say, well, we're just not going to do it. We're not
Yeah.
ready. But
Yeah.
if you're an independent, you're kind of going,
Gosh,
can
yeah.
I say this, or shall,
Gotcha.
you know.
Well,
it's-
I mean, we're going to show you a clip now from hopefully a series that need no introduction at all. So I won't say what it is, Mark, if you want to just run it a little bit first. And we'll talk about this show, which I think is probably one of your great Renaissance shows, I think, in recent years.
Do me a favour. I grew out of vanishing skeletons before I was into long trousers. You're going to kill someone on Halloween, you think they'd come up with something more original than that?
Probably not even a real vicar. He's probably wearing rubber underwear.
You don't kneel in front of him with your eyes closed.
Right. Several intriguing features. I thought so. So, on the basis of striking whilst the iron's hot, it's probably not more than an hour's drive from your place.
I'm not at my place.
I'm at Adam's. We've had a very late night, and I've got a 50-minute TV special to go through, which is going to take all day. So just tell him to bugger off and stop sniffing the nail polish.
Right.
How did you come to be involved with David Renwick then? Because that was...
Well, that was an interesting thing, because I got a call from Geoffrey Perkins, who was then head of comedy at the BBC, and asking me if I'd be interested in producing it. Well, not the first series, the second series. And I'd watched some of the first series and thought, oh, this is really rather good fun and also quite unusual, and not like anything else. I mean, I suppose all my life I've tried to make programmes which have some kind of originality in them. I mean, I may not always have succeeded, but that has been what I've tried to do. And I thought, oh, that's original. And so I said, well, why? And what had happened was that David had a very, very long relationship with a very, very good producer-director called Susie Belbin, who had taken early retirement from the BBC. And then there had been another producer who was a friend of somebody who Caroline wasn't keen on. So it was kind of like this and I said to Geoffrey, this sounds like the poisoned chalice. Who do I have to impress? And he said, oh, well, you have to meet David Renwick. And I went along to meet David, and I think basically, I know David very well now, we get on extremely well. But I think at that point, he was thinking, oh, this woman is going to come in and she's just going to want to change everything, because that's what producers do. And so they said, well, what do you think about the show? And I said, well, I really liked it. I said, and I did say a couple of things that I felt could work different, but they weren't changes. They were just kind of refining things. And so I started working on it. And for the first 3 months, I really have to say, I thought David I was there on the sufferance, because, he's quite a shy man and quite introverted. So he doesn't really tell you very much. And you think, oh God, he probably hates everything I'm doing. I think. Anyway, one day he turned around and said to me, I really love working with you, and that was fine. And after that, we've always been fine. But it was a sort of odd beginning. It's very interesting as writers, because quite often they're not particularly articulate. And when I was first asked to produce Budgie, I had to go and meet Keith Waterhouse and Willis Hall for lunch, who both come from Yorkshire. They're both very monosyllabic Yorkshiremen. And I'm having lunch with them, and with Stella Richmond, who was the director of programmes. And I thought, God, this is going to be a complete nightmare, because I would say something and they'd both grunt, and it would be like, I think, oh no, this is what a terror. I mean, it all turned out all right in the end, but it's quite kind of frightening to begin with.
Quite right. And I mean, I suppose the thing about the Jonathan Creeks, I mean, and I'm sure you knew the answer before they started, but in some sense, I mean, some people reckon it was always very easy to work out the solutions to the mysteries, as it were. But is that something that you had to sort of consciously perhaps sit down sometimes, think about, perhaps we need to make them more difficult, perhaps to work out, or or perhaps are they too hard to work out? Was that something that came into production meetings? How to resolve the mysteries?
Well, I mean, the way David Renwick writes is that what you get a script in, which is basically he has reworked it until everything works. There is always a logic within it. And I think that, most of the mysteries were based on the locked room. I mean, how did anyone get into the locked room? Now, very often you knew why something had you quite often did know or could work out who'd done it. But it wasn't so much who'd done it, it was how they'd done it. That was really the key to those scripts. So you could sometimes say, well, it had to be so-and-so, but how could they have got into that? What happened? And there was always some kind of extraordinary, brilliant sort of set of clues that David worked out. I mean, how he didn't find them easy to write because they required so much kind of skill in terms of working out, the actual clues. Yeah. And at the same time, he is a writer who writes wonderful characters. So even though you would get maybe someone with 4 or 5 lines, they would have a distinct identity.
Did you think about stopping when Caroline Quentin wanted to move on?
No, actually, we didn't. I mean, because it would have been different if Alan had wanted to move on, because Alan was Jonathan Creek, and Caroline was wonderful as Maddie. I mean, she was fantastic. But David always felt that if necessary, he could always create, which he did, another different character. It wouldn't be a question of replacing Caroline as Maddie, because you couldn't do that, because she has such a strong, big personality so it meant you had to find somebody who was actually different.
I think we have a clip of Julia, don't we, Mark, as well? Mark 2, I suppose.
Time to make a move then. Grub's up downstairs, apparently.
Thank you very much. You ever hear of knocking? All right, you're just going to stand there, are you, while I get ready?
You'll do.
I can see how it's a knack you'd have, making women disappear. Not something you'd have to work at, really, is it?
I want like your mailed fist approach to negotiating, you mean?
People talk tough to me, I talk tough to them. Because tough gets results. In business, in life generally. Do you know this anklet has still got bits of your muck on it? When I think what it cost me.
Anklet? What are you, Barbara Stanwyck? This is it from me.
The writing's so strong, isn't it?
Well, his writing is wonderful. I mean, it just is so good.
Are you going to do some more? Would he ever write some more, do you think?
Well, he's deep in Love Soup at the moment. That I don't know that he'd ever write. I don't think he'd ever write another series. He might write a one-off.
Gotcha. Oh, well,
I mean, I don't know. I mean,
yes,
it's not
that's right.
something
I
that I've
know you've got no great inside knowledge. I'm just intrigued
and
to
you
know.
never do with David. Because
I had heard you were back at the BBC. You see producing again.
I am back at the BBC.
So I assume
producing another series of Love Soup.
Right.
But I mean, he's one of those writers that you can't really talk to him. He's in the middle of writing, because we're doing 6 more Love Soup and we're doing a special, which will be the final episode.
Right.
And he's in the middle of writing that at the moment. So don't ask me if they meet, because I haven't got the script.
I probably wouldn't have asked that anyway, because I don't know.
Always does.
Yes, well, that's quite true. But perhaps I'm just too locked in the past, I think. There was one more thing we were going to show you. We hadn't talked much about Budgie, but what we showed in March was a bit of from one of the old Aquarius shows of you directing Budgie.
Oh,
yes.
I was directing the Aquarius. Mike Newell and I directed
that was it. Yes,
together,
that was it.
Yeah.
So we kind of figured
that was huge fun. I loved that.
Yes, well, we thought we might show you a clip of that, and you could perhaps tell us what that was like to sort of it's almost like being an auteur on your own work, isn't it? Really, you know.
Actually, it's just like being, let out of school, really. Because if you're the producer, you're always saying to the director, "For God's sake, don't shoot so much material and don't do that thing." And suddenly, there you are, you get let loose with the camera, and you can do everything you've ever wanted to do.
So here's Verity in her earlier days. Go on, Mark.
Have you read the next one?
I'll lend you this as well.
I'm still trying to learn number 11. No, I left the rehearsals yesterday, didn't I? So I thought last night I want to get some sleep, to be fit today to try and learn it. Sinners. But time. No? I think I know what you want to be. You want to be a man of action, don't you? That is right, Badgie. Now look. A man of action is a man who acts. Now you're going to be that man who acts, ain't you? You really think so, Badgie? I'm telling you. For yours, for my sake, you're going to act. From now on, you're going to act. Now, do you understand?
Did you find it difficult having to make something in black and white as well for the strike? You talked about the '79 strike. You were affected by the '71 strike, weren't you, as well?
Yeah, well, I think if you worked in television in those days, you were always affected by one strike or another.
Very true.
Well, probably not, really. I mean, the fact is that I'd been making most shows in black and white up until then. I mean, it was only a few years of colour.
It was just interesting because
I mean,
upstairs, downstairs, they went back and reshot the first one in
Yes.
colour. But Budgie, with the first 4 being in black and white, I always thought perhaps they might have gone back and reshot the first one.
Well, I think Budgie was a bit of a. I mean, upstairs, downstairs was a nice show about nice people. And Budgie was not about nice people. And I do remember the very first Budgie went out, and I got a memo. I was going to say an email, but there wasn't such a thing. I got a memo from, I think it was Cyril Bennett, who was director of programs at LWT at the time, and he had received a letter from whoever was the owner of Mothercare, saying that all the people who had produced Budgie should be fired immediately, and he was not going to allow Mothercare to advertise in any show, in any of the Budgie shows. So I think probably London Weekend thought maybe it's not worthwhile putting them into colour.
And yet probably it's run and run in terms of its popularity over the years, hasn't it? I mean,
well, yes, it probably
it's
has.
been so successful. Well, I think it's time the audience spoke for a bit, because we've talked about a lot of different points. Anyone got any questions? We've got a hand up. I'll see who we can talk to. Go on. William, go on.
Can you talk about what you're doing now with Verity? Is your company producing Love Soup, or are you?
No, my company doesn't produce Love Soup, but we are developing a couple of projects, which.
That's good.
Such as?
Well, one's a script, a John Mortimer script, and the other is a book by Stella Rimington, who has written a thriller, a rather good
Great.
thriller.
Would be
They
good.
sound like they're one-offs more than series.
The Mortimer certainly would be a one-off. Yes, it's not a rumpole. It's on his latest book, but the Stella Rimington might be a series.
Be good.
What kind of stage is that?
We're sort of we're scripting at the moment.
That's interesting. There you see. Good. Any more questions? Any more questions? Right, go on.
I wanted to know, is there anything you haven't been able to produce that you would have liked to, or any ideas you've had that you haven't been able to come to fruition?
Well, I have got a film script that I've had for 9 years that I quite like to produce, but which is a rather curious book by an Australian, well, it's actually by an English guy who lives in Australia. It's actually a children's book, but it's called 2 Weeks with the Queen. And it sounds rather mawkish, but actually it's quite funny. It's about this kid whose younger brother is diagnosed with a particularly virulent terminal form of cancer, and his parents send him off to London so that he shouldn't be with his younger brother. And he decides that the Queen's doctor would be able to cure his younger brother, and he gets into this set of adventures. But it's actually It's about a kid growing up and coming to terms with a thing, and it's done in a very nice way. And there's always been a certain amount of interest in it, but not enough.
Great. Okay.
I suppose there's lots of things I would like to do, but I can't think of them now.
That's great. Any more questions? Gosh, go on.
You've spoken a bit about El Dorado, which I loved a bit and I think was way ahead of its time.
Thank you.
I'd like to know, how do you think that you made some attempts to get the show back on track, you said.
Yeah.
How did those attempts manifest themselves and to what extent were they successful? Because it obviously improved as it went on.
Well, I think one of the problems, there were several, there was a major time problem. There was, and that was made worse by the fact that the cast, some of the casts were very, very inexperienced. There's even a question in my mind if some of them should have ever been cast at all. But having cast them, they needed a lot more time to be able to work properly. I mean, it wasn't their fault. People who were inexperienced, who were given an awful lot to do in a very short time, it just wasn't fair on them, basically, either. So there was some bad acting. There were some problems with the building, which we could have put right really fairly quickly, and did indeed put right, which was the sound quality, which we didn't have time to experiment with and to hear what certain things were going to do. So that was a sort of technical problem, which we would have righted very quickly. The main problem with the scripts, and the reason the scripts, in my opinion, were not as good as they should be, is that the writers were allowed to write them in England. They were allowed to visit Spain and then come back to England to write their scripts. Well, I think that was a big, big mistake, because they were like visitors, and therefore, consequently, you never got a feeling, at least I didn't get a feeling in the first, I suppose, 2 or 3 months, that these people actually lived in a place, because the writers hadn't lived in it, so they didn't convey what living there was like. And as it went on, I mean, the problem with changing something round is like turning around a ship in the middle of the ocean. You're so far ahead of yourself that even if you start to change things, it's like months before you actually see the results of those changes. But what we did after, I suppose, about 3 or 4 months is Corinne Hollingworth came in to produce it, and she very firmly made all the writers and the script editors, she made all the script editors live in Spain. And the writers were also made to go out there for quite long periods of time. So, I weeded out certain characters who simply weren't working. And I think she had started to get a more realistic, she had a much more realistic approach, and I think the actual scripts were more realistic, and the acting got better, and she started looking at the strengths of the people there and the weaknesses and started weeding them out. So I think she was in the process of turning it around, and had we been given another year, I think it would have worked.
Mm-hmm. That's a good comment. Good comment. Any more questions? Oh, yes, go on.
Just another question on El Dorado, Mark Shuttleworth. I was thinking that obviously EastEnders, when it first started off reasonably successfully, and then sort of went into a real doldrums, and why is the BBC spending license fee on this rubbish? Obviously spent a fortune on the set, etc. But obviously at the time of the mid-80s, BBC were happy to continue with it by Christmas '86. It got I think still the highest ever view figures for it. So do you feel if El Dorado had been earlier, it was in a position in the early 90s of the BBC where we're starting to get in a very sort of bean-counting mode, where in the 80s they weren't. So do you feel if it had been earlier, they would have given it longer? Because I think Jonathan Cowell had left, was it?
So say if you'd made it in 1990.
Well, yes. No, I think you're probably right in the sense that Michael Grade, who was there when EastEnders started, was very much prepared to support EastEnders through what was a sticky patch. I mean, in actual fact, I looked up all the reviews of EastEnders. I looked at the reviews of Coronation Street, which got the most awful reviews when it started. The problem with El Dorado, in terms of BBC politics, was that that John Burt didn't want it to begin with. John Burt never wanted El Dorado. It wouldn't have mattered if it had won a Pulitzer Prize, he wouldn't have wanted it. And so he was very, very unsupportive, and he was director of programs at the time. And he was unsupportive in the press as well as unsupportive in the BBC. And the press were gunning for the BBC. I mean, they felt that the money that was spent on building that set was excessive, and it became a whipping boy, really. And then, of course, as you're so right, Alan Yentop took over from, who was it? Was it Mike? Who was the head of BBC One?
Jonathan Powell, I think.
Jonathan Powell, that's right. Because Jonathan commissioned, and Alan was put into what I think was a very difficult situation for him, is that he wasn't going to win either way. He wasn't going to win if he kept it going and it didn't work, and he wasn't going to win by cancelling it because it would never make its money back. Actually, although I think it hasn't done badly, even so, funnily enough, with overseas sales and things.
Is it more popular overseas? I wondered about that, actually.
Well,
if it's still sold
certainly people
overseas.
I know who live out of London would, expats liked it because to a certain extent they related to it. But, I mean, there probably weren't enough of them to make it a huge success.
Yeah.
But, so Alan decided that he could get rid of it, and it would never be his fault, which is true, I mean, whereas if he kept it and he made the wrong decision, then he could be blamed as much as poor old Jonathan Powell was for it. So there were a whole lot of reasons why. But I think it's unfortunate. I think if somebody at the BBC had been there to champion it, it would have worked eventually.
Do you think it's left them very risk averse now after having spent a lot of money on it?
Sorry, I couldn't.
It's left them very risk averse now to anything like that.
Do you think the BBC would not take risks in that way, perhaps, nowadays?
Well, BBC spend a lot of money on certain programmes. I don't know, maybe they wouldn't. You've got EastEnders. As long as they've got EastEnders, I don't think they would start putting money into something else like that.
They might, of course, start.
I mean, in a way, they've got things like Holby City and Casualty, which are very long-running programmes, which have that kind of elements, the sort of soap elements within them, which do very well for them. I mean, in a very different way, so does The Bill do well for ITV. I mean, these are, so they're not going to, I suspect, risk. I mean, they do. I think they're going to. Aren't they doing a spin-off from? I mean, they'd rather do a spin-off from something
talking about doing a spin-off from Holby City,
which
police
is
station,
in itself is a spin-off from Casualty, and I mean, it's like, and then they'll do a spin-off of a spin-off of a spin-off. I mean, that's what I think depresses me about television now, is that people are too frightened to try to do something new and different. It always has to be something that has some elements of something else that's there.
That's very true. It's a fair point. Any more questions? No more questions? We've got a tiny bit of time left, not much. If not, I'll ask probably the saddest question ever. But William, go on then.
So I'll take another one. But this is, could you talk about the knowledge? It's just
The knowledge.
I loved it so.
Oh well, yes, I love the knowledge. Well, the knowledge was wonderful because Jack, Bob Brooks, who directed it, and Jack Rosenthal came to me and said they wanted to do this film about taxi drivers. Of course, it's not about taxi drivers at all. It's about life, but. And so I just loved the whole idea of working with Jack Rosenthal, who I thought was a wonderful writer. I think so. I said, fine, absolutely. But there's a sort of funny story attached to that because I commissioned the script, and on the week that it was due on its date, Jack rang me up and he said, I want to come in and see you about the script. And he arrived in with the script in his hand. And sat down and he said, well, I just brought the script in. And he said, I don't want you to look at the script because I'm not happy with it, but I just brought you the script in so that you know that I've written it. I thought he was joking, of course, and I said, oh, come on, for heaven's sake. I mean, okay, well, now let me have a look at it. And he said, no, I mean it. I'm not letting you see it. He said, because I'm very unhappy with it and I don't want you to read it. So I went, well, what? Jack, I mean, we had a bit of a tussle over the script, we go, oh, come on. Anyway, eventually I said to him, well, what do you want me to do? And he said, well, I just wanted you to know that I'd written it. He said, now I'll go away and rewrite it, which he did. But I love the knowledge. It was absolute pleasure to make. And I think Jack, who was a hard taskmaster because he was very, very committed. He's like David Renwick. Both of them really like to be there and make sure that everything's right. I think he enjoyed it too. I think it was one of the things he enjoyed and liked of like the way we made it.
Fantastic. On that note, I think that's a wonderful note to say thank you to Verity Lambert. Thank you very much. There is one more thing I'm going to do. And add it. Verity will be around until about 4:10 when she has to go and catch her train, unfortunately, to get back to her poor dog. She can't leave her dog for too long. These dogs do need their walks, there's no doubt about it. I know. We have a dog waiting at my sister's house for me. Eagerly waiting for a walk as well. Yes, eagerly waiting for a walk as well. So I know the feeling exactly there. Well, obviously she'll be around to talk to you during afternoon tea now. If you want to ask her anything or get her to sign anything, we've got a few things we'd like you to sign. But something, it occurred to me, I mean, Christmas being Christmas, we've been doing these events for many, many years now, and almost for as long as those, we've been trying to get you to come to one of them. But there have been some people who've come religiously with us now, year in, year out for years, supporting us, and they are the Royal National Lifeboat people. And we've never given them a Christmas present before. So I thought, while you're here, Verity, would you help me give them some Christmas presents?
I certainly will. We're more than delighted.
Can we have Chris, and can we have Sue, and can we have Jim? Because I worked out you've helped us now for nearly over 10 years.